I'm back for 2021. We cranked out a whopping 17 episodes last year with so many big names, and I thank you all for your support. Some of you may have been thinking that was it. Well, it's not the case. We've been tied up with some other projects, but we go again on Greats with Garby, and in a pretty awesome way for the first episode of this year. I cannot wait for this. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a monumental Entourage fan, one of the biggest TV series hits of the last 20 years. As I sit here right now, I have a big frame poster of Ari, Vince, and the lads behind me. It's not sport, but hey, if you're a sports fan like all of you are, there's a very strong chance that it crosses over with the love for Entourage. And recently, I was lucky enough to get in touch with the man who helped bring us so much joy and entertainment over 8 seasons, 96 episodes, 26 Emmy Award nominations, 14 Golden Globe nominations, 1 movie, and countless laughs. He is the creator of the show, Doug Ellin, and he's been good enough to join me from his bed in Los Angeles. Doug, hello to you.
From my bed, I sound like John Lennon. Yeah. I had a little dental surgery, so I'm dealing with some pain management, but I'm okay.
That's good to know. Mate, thanks so much for joining us amid those circumstances. How's life for you now? Let's get us straight in off the bat. Victory, the podcast, you're involved in that in a big way with Kevin Dillon and Kevin Connolly, Drama and E from the show, of course. That seems like the number one thing for you right now. What else is going on in Doug Ellin's life apart from recovering?
Yeah, I mean, that's been amazing. That's been a lot of fun. And also I wrote a show. I'm supposed to do this premier football league show called Day Ones, loosely based on Thierry Henry. We'll see, but the world kind of shut down right as we were getting rolling, but we'll see. Hopefully we can get that back up and going. But I'm really focused on the podcast because it's been so good, and it's really, it's been growing by the week, and it's been doing great in Australia, which is awesome. I don't know how big the podcast audience is there yet. I'm sure it's growing just like here, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of fans that I've spoken to all know about the podcast. Victory, the podcast. If you're not across it yet, it's Doug, Kevin Connolly, and Kevin Dillon, as I said, and they get all the stars from the show to come through with some regular appearances, and they go through all the stories from the show, which is what we all love as fans. So we'll go through some of those, of course, over the next little bit, and that helps.
Yeah, and we've got a lot more too. We had Charlie Sheen on yesterday, who everyone in America has been trying to get Charlie Sheen to talk. We got him on yesterday, which, we talked, because the show, we talk about Entourage, but we talk about so much more from our lives, our careers, etc. And then, we brought Charlie on, who did Platoon with Kevin Dillon in 1984, and we discussed his career, his ups and downs. So we're getting into a lot of stuff. We had Andrew Whitworth from the Los Angeles Rams and Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. So we're expanding into other stuff also.
Brilliant. And this will act as a little teaser for all of that, if you like. We'll get into some parts of the show, but then you get on the Victory podcast and you get the nuts and bolts of it all and all the detailed stories. So make sure you do that. In terms of how we got in touch, because obviously I told some friends that I was chatting to you and they're like, what? How on earth did you get in touch with Doug Ellin? And it was through Twitter. Basically, on about the 400th viewing of Entourage the other day for me, I noticed a little glitch or flaw in the show, if you like, and I messaged you on Twitter about it. It was when Vince is in a meeting with Alan Gray, who becomes a reasonably prominent character later on, and in his first meeting with him, he actually calls him John, and it just caught me by surprise. So I messaged you on Twitter and I said, what's the story with that? And from there on, we got in touch and I was able to message you privately. So maybe now you can clear up that little incident.
Yeah, you know what? There's a lot of things on Entourage. We talk about it on Victory, the podcast, because I always say, when I was pitching the show, my agent gave me the Bible for the show The Wire, which I don't know how big that show is or not in Australia, but one of the great TV shows ever written, and David Simon's one of the great writers ever. And my agent gave me this 40-page novel of what the whole show was going to be. And he said, this is what you should be prepared for when you walk into HBO. And I said, I can't do this. What are you, out of your fucking mind? I'm not capable of doing something like this. So Entourage was really kind of I made a lot of it up as I went along. I mean, we did our best to have structures, but then some things get lost in that. We worked in the chaos, which I think helped make the show feel so alive and real, which is what we were going for, but also my kind of ADD adds to that levels. But there were also things that I did. A lot of people say, well, Vince and Drama had the same father, and then all of a sudden they had the same mother. And, I decided to do that when I wanted this episode where Vince needed a date for a premiere, and I didn't want him to take his father. I wanted him to take his mother and Johnny's mother, so I changed it. And, a lot of people told me at the time I'd get criticized, but I was always about what's the best moment. As far as the name mistake there, that was just it was a mistake. It was an oversight, and sometimes those things happen, though I guarantee they don't on The Wire.
Yeah. They were few and far between. I mean, there's a couple. Ari has 3 kids to start, and then 2. Dana Gordon has a kid.
Yeah, well, then I found my kid played, my son played Ari's son. So once my son got to the age of talking, he'd be on set and everybody loved him so much. I'm like, you know what? Let's make him the son. So
brilliant. There's some Australian links as well. A few. I mean, there's the episode where they're about to do the surfing movie before they do Aquaman, of course. And Ari's like, we're going to Australia. We're going to wrestle with Russell Crowe and headbutt some motherfucking kangaroos. That's a great line. Holly Valance is in it, the Perfect 10 model. There's a couple of Australian links there. Any more you can think of?
Sophie Monk, I think, right?
Of course. Yep.
I'm trying to think who else. I'm blanking, but there's definitely a couple others, and it wasn't like I went out and looked for Australians, but the interesting thing is I've had this thing for Australia since I was a kid. Paul Hogan, long before Crocodile Dundee, I was watching the Paul Hogan show, and that humor just really spoke to me. And my whole life, I've just had good Australian friends, including now in LA. And when we couldn't find some of these actors, because it was really important to me to find New Yorkers, authentic, real New Yorkers that could be like the people I grew up with. And we were having a hard time. And, my casting director would be like, we need to look in Chicago. We need to look in here. I said, no, we don't. We need to look in Australia or England, because for whatever reason, the best non-New Yorkers that have played New Yorkers are either from the UK or from Australia. But also, I've had this thing with Australia. I've been trying to get there my whole life. I was supposed to go there junior year of college, but I started dating a girl who convinced me not to. And then my brother lived in Sydney for 2 years, and I was supposed to go, and things happened. And then right before the pandemic, my friend was playing in the Australian Open. I'm like, that's it, I'm going. And I was booking flights, and the world kind of ended again. So it's just somewhere I've never been, which is crazy, and that I've had this real kind of love for, and can't wait to get there. I play, you're doing a sports thing. I play a sport called pickleball here, which I don't know if it's hit Australia, but it's kind of like mini tennis. And I play with a couple of Australians who are like the best paddle tennis players in the US. They win like the championship every year. And I play with a bunch of tennis players, but I love the Australians, and the friend of mine who's a stylist who dresses us, I don't dress that well unless she really demands me to, but is also an Australian. And I just have a great love for a place that I've never been. And as soon as this is over, I'm coming. So
brilliant. Well, mate, you've got friends over here, that's for sure. I'd welcome you with open arms, because you brought us so much joy for so many years. I mean, Australians resonate with the show so much because it's a bunch of blokes, sitting around tearing strips off each other most of the time, which is such a huge part of Australian culture, of course. So that's why it resonated so strongly here. I noticed Vince was down here recently as well, promoting the show, which is on Binge now as part of the sort of the Foxtel network. So he's been spending some time here. Yeah.
I mean, everyone's been there but me. It's honestly, it's so crazy that I haven't been there, because I've been talking about Australia for legitimately 45 years. And I am swearing that I will get there in the next couple of years. So hopefully sooner rather than later.
We hope so. Who was your friend who played in the Australian Open, out of interest?
Sam Querrey.
Oh, yeah. Okay. He's
so
prominent.
I actually went to, Sam was top 20. I saw him in Wimbledon the year before. He was in the semifinals. He was 2 points away from playing Federer in the finals. So I play some pickleball with Sam. I do the best I can. But so he was in the Australian Open, and that was an excuse to go. Of course, I wanted to see him, but I have to get there already.
Good stuff. Speaking of Vinny, he hasn't been on the podcast. Why? I mean, is there some sort of disconnect there with him and the other lads?
I mean, not that I know of. I mean, I can't tell you, we were all like brothers. I mean, I consider these people my family, and I have no answer for it. I just posted on Instagram today that for my birthday, which is coming up, I want Adrian on the podcast. And I spoke to him for, a little chat, and he kind of said he was in a place in his life or something where, he'd get back or something like that. And I was supposed to accept that, but I don't. So he's going to have to come back, and we all spend a lot of time on the podcast talking about our love for him and abusing him like friends do. But there's no issue that I know of. And we will get him at some point. So
I hope so. He does seem from the outside a little bit different to the other guys who seem like, your real boys boy type guys. And Adrian seems a little bit different. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, Adrian was always, and I the word different sounds like there's something wrong with him, no, he, we the three, Jerry Ferrara played Turtle, Kevin Dillon who played Drama, and Kevin Connolly. Those really are like the guys I would have grown up with. They're the sports guys and just the beating the shit out of each other kind of guys. Adrian is definitely more of the artist and more of the, sensitive guy who definitely isn't one of those guys who's busting balls all the time, but he's a great guy, great actor. There's no one we could have gotten on the planet. I mean, it was so hard to find casting for that role, to find someone believable as a movie star who actually wasn't a movie star. And, so he was great, and I have nothing but love for him, but he's going to do this podcast, at some point.
Let's hope so. His role is really interesting because whenever you talk to people about Entourage, obviously Ari Gold gets mentioned first, and then Drama and how brilliant they were as characters. And a lot of people say, Vinny, played by Adrian Grenier, he was a bit bland. He didn't really offer too much. I disagree enormously. I actually think, having watched it so many times, he's fantastic because not only does he provide the glue for everything else to operate around, he has some pretty pivotal moments, like the Mandy Moore episode and that whole set of events in the lead up to Aquaman, the dark spiral that he goes down when he gets involved with the drugs later on. He does sort of fire up and have those deeply emotional moments too, which takes the show to another level. Does he get a rough ride, do you think?
In my opinion, he 100% does. I mean, I remember the first time we got him on a camera, what we did when we were looking for this movie star, which is not just, let's find a handsome guy. It's a guy who's got to have that it factor. And the first time we put together when they were auditioning, we edited together a tape of Kevin Connolly who played E, and Adrian. And Kevin's a good-looking guy, and it's like, how are you going to get the better-looking guy? And then we put them together. He has that way, and everything about him, he carries himself in the way that was perfect for Vince, which is this nonchalance, this kind of lack of concern. Yeah. But when he needs to turn it on, which he did often, and as we're doing, this Victory the podcast, every week, the three of us are talking about, God, Adrian is so good in this. And I think, look, in my opinion, and Kevin Dillon and Jeremy Piven are two of the funniest people on the planet Earth, but they've got the funny roles. And Vince is kind of the straight man, and he's got almost more of a dramatic role. And the conversations that go on between E and Vince are usually, which were the hardest to write, those were more real and more serious. And Drama and Ari, who, again, these guys are geniuses in my opinion, but the lines for them were definitely a little broader, a little funnier. They had a little more, things to do that were going to just really pop and resonate. But there's no show without Adrian. And we saw everybody in this town. And, short of getting Leo, Mark Wahlberg, or Ryan Gosling, like there was no one even remotely close to Adrian. And, when I look back at it, there's not a single thought in my head that doesn't say we were lucky to have him, and all of them,
Yeah, he's great. And you talk about those scenes between E and Vince. For me, that's when the show goes to another level. At the end of season 2, when they have that big fight over Aquaman and Mandy Moore, and Vince is like, don't be here when I get back. And he's like, I fucking would be. That's a moment you go, wow, hang on. These guys are actually, they're willing to put their friendship on the line for all of this. That's when for me, it actually rockets up to another level.
Yeah, and I mean that's what we did all the time, and those are the things that for me were really real friendships and real relationships. And when we're doing this podcast now, it's funny because that is me and Kevin Connolly now, and kind of always was. And I mean, we've had fights on the podcast that are similar to that, and 30 seconds later, it's like your brother. And as I said with my Aussie boys that I played pickleball with, we have the same stupid shit, and these guys are far superior athletes to me. They're also 20 years younger than me, but we have the same kind of that banter. And that's what I love. And those are real friendships when you can really tell someone, because I think to me, what was interesting about the LA Hollywood part of the business, especially back then, is nobody ever saw somebody talk to a movie star like that. It wasn't, there was no TMZ, there was no reality shows, there was no any of that. So that to me is how real friends talk, and the real stars that I know, that's how them and their best friends speak to each other when they get in the heat of battle, which is like any friends,
Undoubtedly. And for me, that was why the show was such a success. The premise of the show, if you like, it was this, you're almost a voyeur into a world that 0.0001% of the population will ever experience, right? Like being a top level A-list movie star where fame and women and money and all of those things are just given to you, and no one can experience that. But then that's fused with something that everyone experiences, which is friendship, and everyone understands. So you put those two things together and you have a hit. Was that always the premise from the start for you, that you knew those two things working side by side would make the show a hit, or did that just come along later?
No, that was the premise from the start. I mean, and again, the world is so different now. People can accept Hollywood. They like reality shows. They like to know every single thing about the business of Hollywood. Back then they didn't, and nobody wanted to make shows about Hollywood. Fox had made a show called Action with Jay Moore. That was a good show about Hollywood, but it was a real Hollywood show. And when I pitched this to HBO and their concerns were about nobody wants a Hollywood show, I said, this is not a Hollywood show. This is a fish out of water show. These are these four best friends who come from nothing, who are living in fantasy land. And the truth is their relationships are more important than the money, the fame, and everything else. And they'll stand by each other no matter what. And, that's to me what I think resonated to people. And, in a way that Sex and the City did as well. But the show's about friendship. And, while I love the Hollywood stuff, and Ari is, was just a pleasure to write that stuff and be, get to see Jeremy perform it. But the main stuff that is always what sticks to me is the friendships. And when people say, oh, do an Ari Gold spinoff, I'm like, there's no Ari Gold spinoff. I would never be interested in doing a show that is just Hollywood. What I cared about was family, friends, loyalty. And, it's funny, even though we're talking about this now, Kevin Connolly just did some interview with Ryan Leaf, who's a famous ex-football player. And I see that Ryan Leaf's like, I'm watching the show back. These guys are terrible. Now he was kind of being funny, but the truth is I don't see that at all. I see these guys as the type of friends that everybody wants to be around. And one of the best compliments I've gotten, and even 15, 20 years later, wherever we're at, is when I meet people, especially young people who got to find the show during the pandemic. They say, this is my group. And, like when I met LeBron James, he said, this is my E, this is my turtle, and this is my drama. And I think most guys who grew up in that kind of, especially working class or lower middle class towns, they have those relationships. And I still have them today. The characters on the show, which, the inspiration for the show, as everyone knows, was Mark Wahlberg. But I kind of took the relationships that I had and things that were happening in my life and put a lot of that into the show. And again, the primary thing that I think about whenever I look back at it, and now, we're up to season 2 when we're doing the podcast. And I'm like, forgetting some of the PC stuff, which of course it would be, and I don't know about Australia, is probably a little less, precious than what's going on in the US right now. But even the stuff that is a little racy or whatever, I don't give a shit about that. I care about that these guys are there for each other, including Ari, like he acts like it's all money, money, money. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, even in the episode you were just talking about, Ari tells Z, like, your boy might have just thrown away his life because he's going to quit a James Cameron movie. And you better be there for him. He isn't going like, I'm abandon this loser, which would really happen in Hollywood, by the way. But, so that, that was probably the most unrealistic thing about the show. People would be like, is the Hollywood stuff real? That was real. What was a little less real is that men approaching 30 could still maintain those relationships. And the times that it does happen is when you have that star who can afford everybody to focus on their relationships, as opposed to, I can't pay my rent, I can't do this, I can't do that. So,
yeah, it's brilliant. And look, I can relate. I mean, my friends have been friends since we were little, and that's something that we all resonated with, even into our 30s, late 30s. That's how we would act if we were in that situation, which is what made the show so special to all of us. I mean, you've hinted at a few things there, but just take us through, and I know it's a very long story, you've gone through it on the podcast, but just try and summarize it, how it sort of was first presented to you, the show, and then how you got it to basically appear on air for the first time and got it off the ground.
So Mark Wahlberg, who was a friend, his manager was also my manager and was also my friend from college. And he what happened was, which is very Entourage-like, I had made a movie with David Schwimmer and Jason Lee, independent movie, cost $1 million. Universal Studios bought it, was releasing it on 2,500 screens worldwide. I was the hottest comedy director in Hollywood for about 90 seconds. I was getting all of these offers and I was turning things down because I was like, I want to do what I want to do. And then the movie came out and it didn't perform according to what someone created as the expectation for what it was supposed to make. And I was literally unemployable after, working for 10 years in Hollywood, selling scripts. I had made another movie that was also independent and I couldn't get a job. And a friend of mine said, you got to get into TV, not this film stuff and whatever. And I didn't know anything about TV. I said, what do I do? He said, write a script for a show that you like. And Curb, which is crazy that it's still on and we're talking about this, but I wrote a Curb Your Enthusiasm spec, not to give to Larry David. It was to show people in this town that I still knew how to write. I gave it to my manager, who was my manager for a decade. And he goes, wow, you can write, which is, typical Hollywood bullshit. But he's like, Mark and I have talked. We don't know what the show is, but we want to do something about like him and his friends, essentially. And that was all there was. And my first reaction was, that's horrible. I do not want to, I'm not an Entourage guy. I don't want to watch a bunch of guys live off another guy. And he said to me, you'll figure it out, which, whatever that meant at the time. I went home and really put, my head to it. And like any great show, what it's always going to be about is relationships and family. Yeah. And if you can get away from the outside in of like, oh, what's all the fun Hollywood stuff we can do, and really focus on who are these people and what are their relationships to each other, which is why I came up with kind of the relationships I have, which is people that I have been best friends with since kindergarten, who are still in my life in every aspect, which was different than Mark's. Mark's crew was mostly people who came along the way and mostly after he was already successful. So we went from there. And then, the idea was to pitch it to HBO, which, now there's HBO, Netflix, Amazon, Showtime, Hulu, et cetera, et cetera. There was nothing. It was HBO to make a show with, R-rated language. And I went in there and we said, we want to do a show where men talk like men really talk, And Mark obviously was the reason it sold more than me. But then it was 2 years of writing scripts and getting notes and being told this sucks over and over and over until they finally said, okay, let's take a shot. And even after we filmed it, we were pretty sure we were not getting picked up. And the day before we aired, the executive that I worked with for almost a year and a half told me, listen, I don't want you to take anything personally, but we do really smart stuff here at HBO, and the reviews are not going to be good tomorrow, but we like the show, whatever. So I was like ready to just be tortured. And when we woke up, the New York Times, which was the thing then, that's all I wanted, which I did an episode about that later, but all I wanted was the New York Times review. And the New York Times said we were the smartest show on TV. And that was pretty wild. And, and then we went from there.
Can you recall a moment when it all blew up then, when it went from that to, hang on, this is now entrenched in culture a little bit?
I mean, obviously I know even 15 years later, you can turn on SportsCenter or somewhere else and hear some reference to Entourage, which is why we called it Victory, because I used to hear that on SportsCenter all the time when someone hit a home run or whatever, whatever it is. So, I could feel it walking around town. I'd be at tables, hear people talking about it and this and that. But I was a grinder, and I was a negative, neurotic Jew who always thought we were going to get canceled, it was going to fall apart. So I really did keep my head down for 8 years, and I didn't get really lost in success, or even when some people turned on the show at one point. I really just didn't, kind of buy into any of it. And I did buy into that New York Times for a minute because that felt really good after a movie I had released. The New York Times said had no business being played in a movie theater. So I had seen the downside and I felt good about that. But that lasted for all of 5 seconds. And then I was like, okay, how are we going to make this good? How are we going to keep this going? And what's next? And, but that being said, I felt it, but I think the actors, got to enjoy more of the cultural phenomenon that it really did become, because, even in the town also, I mean, everything was being pitched after that as it's Entourage set here, it's Entourage set there, and that's a very cool thing, especially when so many people are doubting you when you start,
100%. As a fellow neurotic Jew, I can understand exactly where you were coming from on that. So I get it. But man, it blew up. It blew up really quickly. The casting. So were you always set on those guys for those roles? Were some of them second choices? Was it tough? How did the casting work for each of those characters who, of course, become so pivotal?
Yeah, I mean, everybody auditioned except for Jeremy, who I wrote in my first outline. I loved him from Larry Sanders and other things. Everybody else auditioned, and it was a long process. Kevin Connolly was retired from acting. He wanted to direct. And I couldn't find anyone for his part. Turtle was the only one that there was an alternative for a minute, which was Dominic Lombardozzi from The Wire and a million other things. He's a great actor and ultimately came on the show. He was not available, and I hadn't met Jerry yet. But once I met Jerry, and once I met Dylan, I mean, Dylan walked in one line. I was like, oh my God, how is this guy not like one of the biggest comedy stars in the world? And I meant it, because I said to my producer that day, I said, if we get the show on the air, this guy's going to win an Emmy. Like, I know it. He didn't, but he was nominated. He lost to Jeremy. But those were it. There were no second choices. Now, that being said, we have to go into HBO with second choices, because I was some schmuck who had made nothing in television, and I had very little power except for to say what I thought. And then it was ultimately going to be what they think. So we had to have backups go into those auditions, but there was no one else in our minds. And, there were interesting things, even Adrian, one of the executives at HBO was like, wasn't feeling Adrian from tapes we sent before. So when we got in there to the president, we didn't have Adrian. And honestly, we didn't have a Vince that I was excited to make this show with. But Chris Albrecht, who was the president of HBO and really the guy who put it on, who was like the king of Hollywood at that point, who I'd probably spoken to, for 40 seconds in the year and a half that we had gotten to this point. And now I'm in front of him showing him our actors. And when we walked out, he goes, you don't have a Vince, which I knew. And I go, but wait, we have this tape, which was kind of political because, one of the younger executives had already said they don't like him. But we loved him. So we sent Chris the tape, and he was like, I mean, come on, that's the guy. And he had booked another job, like in between this time happening. So we had to somehow unravel it and get Adrian in, which we did. And but there was nobody else. And, you know, it was from the minute we got together. And even though, like you say, Adrian was a little different, he fit with them great. And it felt like what I grew up with, which is there was the artist in that group of tough guys, crazy guys, idiots, whatever it was. There was that one guy who was a little bit more of an artist. And, you know, it was great. He was perfect. So, you know, then we were off to the races.
Yeah, exactly right. It fits perfectly. Dom, though, Dominic Lombardozzi, who you mentioned, he plays Dom for a few episodes. I can't imagine him as Turtle. I know it's easy to say in hindsight. I just can't see it.
Well, it was a different show. First of all, Adrian, we were looking for Mark and his crew, which was a much tougher group than what we ultimately had. So, you know, and at one point, you know, like, and listen, Mark's one of the great actors in the world, but Mark couldn't have been Vince. Mark doesn't need this crew around him. And the idea of Vince being a little softer and more of a kind of Leo type, it just all worked for us. But, you know, at one point, you know, one of the scripts I wrote early, which was kind of, again, like Mark's crew and like friends I grew up with, they were tougher. They were getting in fights. They were doing things. And Chris, which he was right, was like, we don't want to make Sopranos in Hollywood. That's not what we're trying to do here. We want like a fun show. So he was totally right. But Dom has a lot of sides to him, but he's definitely a much more intimidating presence. And Jerry, you know, our only casting problem was, you know, Kevin Dillon was 37 and Jerry was 24, and they were supposed to basically have hung out in high school together, which obviously does not make sense, but nobody ever said a word about it. So
we'll get on to Turtle in a moment because I love the guy. But that's interesting how that changed based on the casting. But we've got to talk about Ari Gold off the bat when it comes to the characters. Jeremy Piven. I mean, one of the greatest characters television has ever seen, hands down. If he's not number one, as we say in Australia, then he's in the grand final. He's in the Super Bowl, right? He's just remarkable. When did you realize, I know you wrote the role specifically for Jeremy, but when did you realize you had something special with Ari Gold? Did you know it would be that way from the start, or did it start to marinate in that way? Because he's not as prominent in the first couple episodes.
Well, you know, it's not that he definitely gets more prominent, because there's episodes where he's not even really in them. But when we shot the scene at Koi, which is in the pilot, the first scene with E and Ari, I was like, this is, you know, like I thought this was going to be great. This is a whole other level. And I knew when I saw that scene, even though I still thought we weren't going to get picked up after the show was done, I was like, this is a home run. I mean, you know, he brings an energy and a manicness to it that just, it's alive. And it's exactly like I said, what I wanted the show from the beginning to be was energetic. I wanted it to move. I wanted it to end. And you were like, well, that was fast, even though it was the same amount of time as any other 30-minute show on TV. And Jeremy, you know, that energy really kind of led us. It was like, that was always what I was going for. And it's almost, you know, I look at it almost musically, because a lot of times when I'm directing or on the set and essentially overseeing whoever is directing that episode, I just put on the headphones and listen rather than even watch what the shot looks like, because I'm all about the pace and the words. And Jeremy was a pace setter. And I knew when we had that scene, and I thought like just Connolly and Jeremy together was such a perfect match. And that was kind of the engine for 7 years. They're battling and you know, even though it's, you know, a little bit of the same thing, the little jokes, which we still do, you know, on the podcast. We call Connolly small and little at least fucking 4 times a week now. So, you know, but you know, he exceeded my expectations, but he was who I wanted and who I wrote it for, you know?
Fantastic. I mean, I got asked about 10 years ago as part of like the Hanukkah edition for the Australian Jewish News. One of several people were asked to submit our Jewish superheroes. I wrote Ari Gold, even though he was fictional. I'm like, guys, my age, we want to be like him, albeit without some of the controversy and the offensiveness that he brings. Like this guy who he's hugely successful, but then also cares about his family enormously, and he's willing to put everything aside for his wife and his kids. And he never, even though he talks it up, he never strays from that despite all the temptation. But there was an element of offensiveness with Ari that was over the top at times, of course, and brought him down. Did you ever wrestle with that, writing some of those lines, even though it was a different world 10, 15 years ago?
Never. I mean, first of all, that was real. He was based on a real guy who, I love him. He was my agent, but, he spoke like that, but people love him. And, it's not excusing it because the world is different and it is more sensitive. And that's a good thing. We grow and we get better and this and that. But in 2003, nobody in Hollywood watched that show and thought, no matter what agency they worked at, that they didn't have 10 people who spoke like that. The difference is that most of those people were actually assholes. And Ari in the show was actually a good guy with a big mouth, And, one of my favorite scenes, which we just talked about with Rex Lee, who was on the podcast with Jeremy together last week, was when, he's leaving the agency in season 2 and he says to Lloyd, let's go. And Lloyd goes, promise me you'll never say anything racially or sexually offensive to me again. And Ari says, I can't promise you that, but I'll promise I'll try, because it's his nature. It's who he is. But at the end of the day, he was going to back Lloyd. And again, I'm not, I don't even think the Australians care as much as the Americans do about this. But I have to say this in America, like, oh, he would never speak like that. He wouldn't speak like that because he'd be fired. Yeah. But the truth is, I think all of us wish we found a mentor like that who cared about us. And I'm not a big person who gets offended by words. I'm a person who gets offended by actions. And when people show up and take care of you and look out for you, that's what Ari was. So, and Lloyd knew that. And that's why they had such a great dynamic. And, on the podcast, Rex and Jeremy really talked about that stuff, but they would look at it, not Rex actually. Rex said, I am an actor and I show up, I get a script, I do the best I can with those words. I don't spend time on it. Jeremy would be worried, do I say it? Now, the thing to me that bothers me and the difference between comedy and drama, James Gandolfini is murdering people on The Sopranos. Does he walk in and go, is it okay for me to murder people today? So it's a character, and you can like him or not. And one of the genius things about Jeremy and Kevin Dillon is both of them are essentially assholes, and they make it lovable and they make it likable. And, we talked about this on the podcast the other day, but everyone's like, what part would you have played me if I could act? And I said, well, actually, I put myself on tape for Ari, when we were starting, just to see it. And it's one of the hardest things an actor can do, which is take words that are abusive and offensive and make them lovable. There's so many people who could have played that role with the same lines, and people would have hated his guts. But Jeremy, he's got that twinkle in his eye that says, I'm kind of fucking with you, and it just works. So
he's remarkable, truly remarkable.
Am I allowed to curse on this, by the way? Should I?
Yeah, man, of course. Go for it. I couldn't care. That wouldn't happen now, though, would it? I mean, you couldn't. Australia is going that way as well, and may not be as bad as America, but it's not far off. Like, things you couldn't get away with saying the things that Ari said now, and the other guys as well. I mean, have you thought about that? Like, this show it actually wouldn't exist 10, 15 years later, right?
No, of course it would. Just like The Sopranos would. People adapt, and people adapt. And obviously, nobody in the United States of America who wants to keep their job is going to walk into an office and speak like that anymore, because you learn. But that doesn't mean his verbal dexterity is going to disappear. It would go into a different direction and it would work. But I don't look at it like that at all, because, again, I look at the show, like I said, it's about friendship, loyalty, and relationships, and they're going to say funny things. And I don't need to write offensive things to be funny. I could certainly find ways that Ari could put people in their place that isn't saying things about Asians or saying things about gay people. And again, I don't look at it like, oh my God, why is the world gone that way? you shouldn't make fun of people's races and their ethnicities and whether they're gay or not. You shouldn't. But that was a very realistic look how people spoke back then, you know?
And people are able to separate it from what it is, entertainment compared to real life.
Smart people are.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
there's a lot of idiots. There's
exactly
a lot of
right.
idiots. And again, it's why I say I just don't get it. You know, when we had Jordan Belfort on, you know, the real Wolf of Wall Street, who's my friend that I grew up with. And I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not going to compare Entourage favorably to Wolf of Wall Street, but there's a lot of similarities. And people look at that as a piece of art because it's Scorsese and Leo and it's based on a true story. But the shit that went on in that movie, which people find hilarious, like they don't look at it as like a horrific drama, allegedly a drama or based on a true story. But, you know, I just, it's a silly, it's just stupid. You know, things are in historical context. And I don't look back at the show now and go, oh God, why did I write that? Why did I write that? I wrote that because I was really desperately trying to capture the world as I saw it. And that's what it was, you know, and it doesn't mean I spoke that way. And, you know, that's what it is. So.
And you did so brilliantly. It's just amazing how things have changed so dramatically in 10 to 15 years. But, you know, it stands the test of time. That's what makes it such a remarkable show. The character of drama is so fascinating because I remember watching it for the first time, Entourage, and this is back when, like, I watched it as the first episode came out. I saw the trailer. I'm like, I will love this show. And that was a time when you couldn't stream things, right? You had to wait week by week to watch an episode. And you dwell on the episode then and watch it a couple times before the next one came out. And I remember the first couple episodes watching with a friend and being like, I can't stand this drama guy. I just don't get it. What is he doing with them? It doesn't make sense. He's so different. He's so annoying. And then maybe a couple of episodes later, episode 3 or 4, he says something. And I remember at the exact moment, me and my friend look at each other and we're like, this guy's brilliant. We get it. We get the shtick. We get what he's doing. It is so friggin' funny. Did you know that was the way it was going to transpire with him, or did it just happen naturally that way?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting that you say that because I really don't talk about this a lot, but, you know, and I don't even like to say this to Kevin Dillon, but there was someone at HBO after that taping that said exactly what you just said. I don't get him. He doesn't fit with these guys. And I thought there was something wrong with them because I knew he fit with them because that's what I know. And that's what I grew up with. So it was not until like season 2 that he called me up and goes, you were right. And I did not get that. I think Kevin Dillon walked into that audition and the first line out of his mouth, which has only happened to me once, and it happened, I was doing a short film. I was 21 years old and a friend of mine brought David Schwimmer from Friends off his softball team to audition for my short film. Never met the guy in my life. He said one line. I said, done. I told everybody I knew, this guy is going to be a giant star. I guarantee it. And I said the same thing about Dillon. And when the person at HBO told me they didn't get him, I was shocked. I went home I was like, I know nothing. I mean, I'm watching this guy. He makes me cry. Every word that comes out of his mouth is not only funny, but I feel for him and I want to help him and I want to like take care of him. And, that's, to me, the genius of Kevin Dillon. And he does it on the podcast, too. And it's not that he's Johnny Drama, but he has that face that just says, please give me a hand, you know? And I don't know. I think so. So, no, I never, ever questioned that Kevin Dillon was perfect for the guys, but other people did, you know?
I mean, the insecurities and the fake bravado of drama, it's just so brilliant. And like how he knows everything and he's been in everything. You must have sat there laughing when you were writing these lines for him, right? Like, I did a spot in Melrose Place, I did a spot in this, a spot in that. And he's always bringing it up. You must have been like pissing yourself writing it.
I was, but it's also like when we do the podcast, when we have Charlie Sheen on, it's the same thing, which is weird because I didn't know anything about his career, you know, when I cast him. And I just wrote it as because he carries himself that way. And he's that guy that you're like, wait, you're good friends with Charlie Sheen? Oh, yeah, you did Platoon with him. Wait, you know Val Kilmer? Oh, yeah, you were in Doors. Oh, you were on 24 in like 2 episodes kidnapping a girl in the forest. he has that similar resume, and all of it just worked. But yeah, we used to just laugh our asses off writing his things. One time Entertainment Weekly asked us to write Drama's resume, and we just spent like a whole day coming up with the stupidest shit of all time for him. I mean, that's why I say I really hope people check out the podcast, because it plays like the show. And I killed myself on that show to write every single syllable. And I was so precious with every comma, every word. And now what a lot of people, when they listen to the podcast, like, it feels like the show. And I'm like, God, why did I spend all that time on scripts? So
amazing. Turtle's so underrated. Like, watching the show back, he gets him out of so many jams, and it feels like he gets all the credit. He's just such a brilliant, lovable character who develops so much from this fat stoner into a mover and shaker. I mean, how did you work with that? Because he's just so underrated for mine.
Yeah, I agree. And it's similar also. It's like Jerry was like a heavy, lazy looking guy, and he transformed his body. It wasn't me leading him into that. It was him leading me into the transformations. And if you watch him from season 1 to 8, his authentic New York accent is so raw and so real and so what I grew up with in season 1. By season 8, he feels like he's lived in LA for 50 years, And it was, I think, on Jerry's, part, a conscious choice so he could get other roles when he comes off of this show. For me, I would write into those things. But Jerry, from the start, he just had this lovable quality about him. And the interesting thing is, you asked when I know things happen. I spent a lot of time, and this is no offense to anybody or trying to be homophobic, but I wanted to make sure the guys were attractive. So I used to walk around with the five guys' pictures, and I would ask every woman that I knew, are these guys attractive? Are they good looking? Do you find them whatever? And season 2, women used to come to the set and they weren't looking for Vince. They were looking for Turtle. They were like, where's Turtle? Where's Turtle? And girls loved him. And it was, for me, it was unexpected and awesome. And it just, Jerry brought so much to it and so much reality to it. And to me, he was the most New Yorker. Yeah. That kind of grounded it to they came from nothing. And he is this do's and don'ts kind of guy. And then he refined himself more than me writing those scripts. Jerry himself did that. So
undoubtedly. And I think he was the most relatable, like the guy who played video games and smoked weed and then thinks, shit, I need to get my life together. So many guys go through that, right? It connected in a way that was brilliant. The cameos. So they're obviously an enormous part of the show. The amount of people that you have playing, some semi-regular roles, others just in for 5 minutes. How do they happen? How much do you have to pay for them? Did some of them come to you and say, we just want to be part of the show? How do they work?
Well, season 1, we can't get anybody. So season 1, Mark's in the pilot. I didn't even know if Mark Wahlberg was showing up. I'm not kidding. I was sitting there with our manager and my friend of 20 years. I'm like, is he coming? He's like, I hope so. And I'm like, what do you mean you hope so? And then we had, I love her, but Gina Gershon didn't show up. We're on a set. She's supposed to be playing a role. She just didn't come for the pilot. So Adrian was actually friends with Ollie Lauder, who's great, called her up and said, could you be on the set of this show that nobody's ever heard of in 20 minutes? And that's how that happened. By season 2, I don't even know. It just, things started turning. Even getting U2 was oh, they like the show. I'm like, are you serious? U2 likes the show? Or Bono likes the show? Whatever. I don't know. And then it really, by season 3, especially the athletes who I think really related to the show because so many athletes, that's how they live their lives. Then we started getting the calls. And some people said there were too many cameos, but the truth is that's the real life. When I finished the Entourage movie and I called up Mark, I said, I want to show you a cut. He said, come over to the house. I go to the house and Kevin Durant, who hopefully you of course know who that is, right?
Yeah.
So like Kevin Durant is just sitting there, 7 foot, top 3 basketball players in the universe, is like, hey, he's going to watch it. Then we go over another time. The Golden State Warriors are there. And, it's just, that's the lifestyle. So when I would get these calls, which for me, it was as exciting as hopefully it was going to be for the people watching it at home. I was excited to have, LeBron James, Tom Brady, Mark Teixeira from the Yankees, and U2, and all of the people we got in the academy. Peter Jackson and Martin Scorsese, and so it was as exciting for me as I hoped that it would be for the fans. And whenever I would get those calls, I was like, yes, I will figure out how to put something in. And I tried always to not make them just, which you see a lot of shows, they did cameo, and it's just like, okay, great, there's blah, blah, blah. I try to give them characters. I try to make them something. I try to give them plot points and differentiate them from themselves, like Bob Saget, for instance, who was at the time known as like America's Dad on Full House. And I'm like, okay, Bob, I want to make you like a lover of cocaine and hookers, So that's, really how that stuff went down.
Anybody an Xbox guy? Like one of the great lines, like out of nowhere.
Oh man. Well, so I guess it's not right now, but like Bob saying like, hey Vince, don't you fuck my daughter. It's so funny to me. And Bob was so great and such a good sport. He's also on the podcast as well, by the way.
Yeah, he's fantastic. The sports star. Brady, LeBron, you're talking about 2 of the greatest sports stars of all time. Thierry Henry as well, of course, who I know you have a relationship with his agent. Chris Bosh, A-Rod. Do these guys get paid or they just want to be on?
No, they get paid the minimum, which is, I believe, $2,500 for the day, so they want to be on. LeBron called us, and I'm like, well, you are on the show. We will figure it out. And again, I love that because LeBron is not just, and LeBron has obviously proven after this that he can do some comedy with Trainwreck, et cetera. But, who the hell knows what he's going to be? And I'm like, LeBron, you're going to fucking look Vince in the face and tell him to give Matt Damon this fucking money. There's no bullshit. You're going to stick your finger in his chest and go, write the check, Vince. And, they were always game, and it was just a lot of fun.
Fantastic. What's your favorite cameo? Obviously, the guys that come on for 2 minutes or whatever, that's a bit different, the big stars, but some of them play, reasonable roles in the show. What's your favorite cameo that you think had a real impact on the series?
It's so impossible for me to say that, James Cameron was like a story point, like a legitimate, real, like purposeful story point. And, James Cameron, Martin Scorsese, Peter Jackson, Gus Van Sant. These are my idols, and Frank Darabont. But, I look at it not from the show. I look at it from my own life. What was my favorite moments? And U2 was my favorite band, and it was my birthday. And within 12 days of the Dodgers telling us we cannot shoot at Dodger Stadium, we get U2, and I'm sitting at the concert like just a regular fan, but I have cameras everywhere, and we get Bono to say happy birthday, Johnny Drama in Spanish. That's like, that's the wish fulfillment I wanted the audience to feel, and I felt it. Yeah. And then Yankee Stadium, Mark Teixeira, who's the first baseman for the Yankees at the time, got us Yankee Stadium. Which I don't know if everyone can appreciate that in Australia, but that's like, they gave us Yankee Stadium to go shoot at for 5 hours, and I brought my children and all of my friends who these characters are based on and more. 50, 60 people and their children were in the stands as extras. So I look at it like that, not who, did the show, but like, Brady and Wahlberg, because that was such an amazing, we were running out of time because Eli Manning, the quarterback of the Giants, had completely screwed me over when he told me he wanted to do the show. And we're days away from filming, and I didn't even know what to do. And I'm throwing shit around my office, losing my mind. And Mark Wahlberg, who's not, he doesn't come to the office very often, but he happens to be at the office. And he's like, what's the matter? I'm like, Eli Manning was supposed to do the show. We're totally screwed. We got nobody else. He's like, what if I call Tom Brady and we do it? I'm like, okay, that'll work, And so those are more of the special moments, or Gronkowski, who Rob Gronkowski is, right?
Yeah, of course.
So like, Gronk, Super Bowl champ. He comes on the set of the movie and tells me he told his friends in high school he was going to be on the show.
Amazing.
Can I put him in? He wasn't even supposed to be there. I'm like, yeah, I'll figure out a part for you. The next thing I know, he's there till 3 a.m. serving extra soup. And, that's how the behind the scenes were. It was like what you saw in front of the camera, was kind of the vibe behind the scenes too. And I mean that in a positive way, not the sex and not the, the vulgarity, just
of
like
course.
A lot of people who really enjoyed being around each other and respected what everyone was doing. So those were the things that are a lot of fun. And the podcast feels the same way. I mean, I got Rex Leon a few weeks ago, and Jeremy texts me while we're doing the podcast. He's like, yo, send me a Zoom link right now. I sent him a Zoom link. He's on with Mike Tyson smoking a joint. And the next thing I know, we got Mike Tyson and Jeremy and Rex on. So those kind of happy miracles were the things that made it so much fun and exciting,
It's so good. I mean, the scene where drama breaks Tom Brady's club is just all time. I mean, this is custom, mine's off the rack. And then he's like 2 minutes later, he's like broken it. Unbelievable. The Lakers games, are they real games that you're shooting in? How does that work?
Those are real games with they're mic'd wirelessly. I mean, sadly, I mean, we wanted Kobe so badly, obviously, but Jeremy starts, Kobe was a fan of the show, but he wasn't in it. And Jeremy starts talking to him during the scene to see if we can get Kobe in it. So these are real games. The crowd is there. We can't quiet anyone down. I can barely hear the dialogue. I'm hoping it comes out. And we had, our sound guys won. I mean, they were nominated every year. I'm not sure how many Emmys they won, but they were so good to be able to get that stuff, to be able to get the stuff live at the Cannes Film Festival, the Sundance Film Festival. We are walking down the street with no crowd controls, just doing dialogue. And that is, those are the memories that are so alive and real. And to me, made the show so special. And that's why when I hear, which you really don't in Australia, by the way, I mean, the Australians really seem to have stayed in the embrace, and the U.S. has turned a corner, I think, where they're back on our team. But they turned on us so hard, which was so fucking weird.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this beloved show became this misogynistic band of fucking animals.
Yeah.
And it's so ridiculous, and it's annoying more than anything else. But during this pandemic, and I think because of the podcast, people have really seen that, okay, we're looking at this with some weird sensitivity that really doesn't exist here. And at the end of the day, we're watching people live a life with their friends that we all want to do. That's what everybody who makes a little bit of money wants to do. They want to share it with their friends that aren't able to make it, and that's the ultimate wish fulfillment. So
you did that. You did that most certainly. Do you have a favorite episode? Is there one that stands out above all others?
I mean, it's not because I got nominated for this Emmy for this one where Jeremy gets fired in season 2. But that's not the reason. It's just, it was, we turned a corner to real drama with him and his wife and him losing his job. And, their family was based on my family. I cast, Jeremy's wife, who was sort of like my wife at the time. My son played their son.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of special memories of that. But honestly, there are so many that it's not about the favorite content of the episode, but it is about what was going on behind the scenes and how much I loved being there. Sundance was a special episode, Vegas, because we just had such a good time while we were making it,
Yeah. I mean, some of the lines, I wanted to know about a favorite line that you might have. Like for me, the ones that stand out, I still laugh about them today. It's like when E says to Turtle, do you think you can get laid without Vince? That's the question. Turtle's like, do I give a fuck? That's the answer. And then should we leave Vince outside when Dom breaks in? If something happens to him, we're all fucked. It just sums up brilliantly how much they relied on this guy, and he was so unashamed about it. They're the ones that get me still to today. Is there a line that stands out for you?
I don't know what line stands out, but in the pilot, because it's so important, and when I'm writing a new pilot or when I'm talking to young writers, it's like you really want to have a line in a pilot that says who this character is that none of the others are going to say. And that line from Turtle, none of these other characters would say that. And drama, like one of my favorite lines, which is not, it's really what Dylan did with it rather than what I put on the page. But it was when I knew we really could maybe have something special here, which is in the pilot again, where they're talking about this movie that Ari wants Vince to do. And drama just like looks at him and he's like, got any parts in there for me, bro? Which is such a narcissistic, self-centered, obnoxious thing to do. But you love him because he's cooking for his younger brother. You know the younger brother's better looking, more successful. And you know this guy would kill for this kid, but he's still so fucking desperate. And I think why I like that so much, you know, again, not for like you're not going to put it on a t-shirt, you know, but it just speaks to what the show is about. These people trying to make it in this crazy world of people that, for the most part, they don't relate to and they don't want to be around. They want to be around each other. They want to make it with each other. So that's one. And then, you know, Victory, which, you know, the fact that we're now almost 20 years later using this. Kevin Dillon didn't want to say it more than once. He didn't understand why I kept telling him to say it. And I said, because it's just going to become your thing. And then like when I see it, like I said on SportsCenter or an athlete say it or whatever it is, it really it resonates to me. So obviously there's comedy lines I could go over, you know, the therapy scenes with Ari, which was, you know, almost verbatim shit that was me and my ex-wife in therapy. You know, I almost more recorded that than write it. Those things, you know, I obviously have a special feeling for it, you know, and then, you know, I don't know. So, I mean, I can come up with different stuff, but I do look at most of the stuff as what was going on in my life at the time or on the set at the time as what stands out to me.
I mean, the monologues are just legendary. I mean, we watch them back over and over again. They're just brilliant theater. Another line I love is when he says to Vince on the way to the Bat Mitzvah episode, which again, as a Jew, is an episode I resonated with a lot. And they're talking about Sloane and he's like, "You don't scare me, you famous fuck." I just love that line because it's like, here's the one guy who doesn't care who Vince is. He's like, "I've known you since you were 6 years old. I can stand up to you and I know your flaws and I can get past you." And then, of course, Sloane comes in and he gets her. It's a great moment, and it leads me on to the next question about Sloane, who becomes such a big character, of course. You know, when did you know she was perfect for the role, and how important was that in providing a key female character that actually connects with the boys?
Well, Emmanuel came in to read for something else for Ari's assistant. And I was like, you know, this is like someone special. And she doesn't feel like anybody's assistant. So I came up with a role for her. And, you know, like, you know me, it's like you, it's like that she's the ultimate Jewish, you know, princess. So I didn't know if the whole world was going to love her the way I did. But it was great when that happened, you know, and it's interesting you say, you know, just, I mean, Emmanuel is the best and the best person off camera as well. But, you know, just touching back on what you said before, like, it's interesting that you pick out these lines for E, which Connolly would be so happy because he thinks, you know, he had nothing to do for 8 years and he was the non-funny guy. And Connolly behind the scenes is probably the funniest of all of them, to be honest with you. And, but that line is, you know, I'm working on this show with Thierry Henry, and it's what I told his manager about that line specifically. That's what you don't see in the other shows, and we don't have to mention them, but there's been a bunch of other shows with about famous people that, to me, they always ring so fake and such bullshit. And that was really like, you know, that's one of my favorite moments. But since you brought it up, and it's Passover, you know, like, I mean, I love when Dylan says, you know, Jeremy says, you know, I went to an Orthodox synagogue, but I was not very religious at all. And, you know, Yom Kippur was like, you know, torture. And so the Yom Kippur episode is definitely one of my favorites. But also when Dylan walks into the bar mitzvah and Ari says something about not showing up for temple, and Dylan says, "I thought that was for Jews only." You know, I mean, it's like, it is so real. And on the podcast, we talk about stuff and you hear them. I actually had someone text me on DM today. He's like, when you guys were talking about challah, it was almost like these guys had never met a Jew before. And these are two of my closest friends. But, we do have these incredible similarities and also culturally different things that none of us have experienced together, Yeah,
exactly. Man, taking Vince to task is like just such a massive part of the show. I mean, it starts early on, right? When Vince is like I'm too good for you guys. I can't remember the first person I ever slept with. And he's like, bullshit. Like everyone remembers their first. Doesn't matter how famous you are, how many girls you've got. Like everyone remembers their first. Like who the hell do you think you are trying to get that by us?
Yeah. I mean, that's the stuff to me. It really is. That's the core of the show.
Yeah.
All the other funny stuff and all of this, that's the stuff that I believe is why it still resonates today, because I think all friends can relate to that stuff. And,
Yeah,
so it's interesting that you pick out that stuff. Most people would not,
That's the glue, I think. That's the glue that holds it all together. What's next? Can we see another movie? I know there's been some rumors of that potentially happening, a reprisal of the TV series in some way. Is there anything that can potentially happen in that sense?
Well, I'm supposed to be doing this Thierry Henry thing called Day Ones, which has some similar elements, but will be different than some of the other crappy sports shows that have done this kind of group of friends things. But, I don't know how much you've been listening to the podcast, but, HBO definitely buried us like we don't exist. And the podcast is definitely bringing it back. I mean, I say this on the podcast, but 12 weeks ago, if you went to HBO Max and typed in ENTO looking for Entourage, you would get Curb Your Enthusiasm. Like we wouldn't even show up. Like we were hidden to the point that they were embarrassed by us. Right. And I kept talking about it on the podcast. And then we moved up to Hidden Gems. Okay. Hidden Gems. One of their most, decorated shows that's ever been on their network. They called the Hidden Gem.
Good.
Then we moved up, which I posted this on Instagram yesterday, to aspirational architectural design. Like shows with aspirational architectural design. And I'm like, are these people out of their fucking minds? And now finally, I think we're in the I don't know if it's must-see comedies, but we've made it into the comedies. We're still lingering behind Ballers, which bugs the shit out of me.
Oh,
but
man.
I think we're moving forward, and I think there's a chance. It's something I said I would never do again. But the podcast has been so much fun, and we've gotten everybody, with the exception of Adrian, to come back.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Who knows?
We'll watch that space. Have the guys battled to break out of their Entourage characters a bit? Has that been a bit of a struggle for them personally when it comes to getting other gigs?
I mean, that's a question for them. I mean, Jeremy did another series after. Jerry did another series right after. Kevin did a couple of movies. Dylan just left to do a movie today, actually. But, that's a tribute to how great they were. And I think it's just finding that next role that resonates past whatever the show is. Those are always hard things. When you can get it, it means you're that good that you turn that character into something so good that people can't see you as something else. But I think all of them are such good actors if they want to. Kevin Connolly really isn't acting anymore. He's got this podcast company that he's built. And, Dylan's doing a movie. Jeremy's working, and he's actually doing stand-up comedy now. Okay. Adrian, as you said, was shooting something in Australia. But that's, to me, is just a compliment to how good they were,
100%. That's the way it works in that industry. Just to finish off, I mean, we've done it for the last hour and a bit. I mean, the show is just such a huge part of society, basically, and culture from what it was, in the early 2000s. How do you reflect on what you've created? Everything summed up. Do you ever sit back and just go like, oh my Lord, what on earth did we create and contribute to the world of entertainment? I was, a central part of this. Do you reflect on just how big of an achievement that is and what it means to you?
You know what? I really don't. I reflect on that, especially now with the podcast, that we develop. This is not normal for television shows to have friendships that last 20 years, and I reflect on that from, yesterday we had one of our cinematographers on. I've had our editors on. I've had our, production supervisors on. there were such great relationships, and I feel that's what I feel the most proud about, that I set a place where we did 8 seasons in a movie, and there are lifelong relationships that came out of that. You know, some people get to keep working together all the time, which most of us have not been fortunate enough to do till this podcast. But those are the things that I think about, and I hope that legacy does not get tarnished by this PC nonsense, because that's what the show was. The show was about friendship and loyalty, and I don't give a shit about the language. No one was ever hurting anybody. Nobody was ever really, a predator. So I hope that people look at it for what it is, which I really do feel now. And, you and I are talking about, like, would the language stand today? But the younger people who are watching it today, they're not going, what the fuck are they saying? Like, who talks like this? They are appreciating it for what it is, and that makes me feel good.
But also, people don't watch the show and then think I can talk like that in society. Like, no one thinks like that, right? Like, we watched this 15 years ago, and the world was a different place. Nobody went out there and said, you can now say this to people. Like, people are smarter than that. They know it's entertainment.
I don't think anybody did then either. I don't think you watched Ari Gold and you walked into your office and started, like, talking to your Asian assistant like that. You know what I mean? That's who he was. He was a character. Just as I said, you didn't watch The Sopranos and decide maybe I'll kill the neighbor tomorrow. It just isn't. It isn't what normal people do and smart people. And that's why, there is obviously need for social justice and some change, but there's also a need for comedy and for art. And sometimes people push things past the limit. Sometimes they don't. But time will tell, and I hope I hope we'll hold up, because we were very appreciated at the time, and there's nothing I hate more than revisionist history.
Spot on, man. You contributed enormously to the lives of millions by just giving us awesome entertainment, and it's such a huge part of the way that the world goes round. So on behalf of me and the millions around the globe, thanks so much for that. It's just one of the greatest things that I've ever been able to watch. I still watch it over and over again and love it. My friends do as well. Thanks so much for spending the last hour and a bit with me. People, go to Victory the Podcast. It's fantastic. You get more and more stories like the ones that Doug's been willing to share with us today. And man, thanks so much. Hope you get better. Enjoy Passover, and really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks. You too. Be well.
Thanks, Doug.
All right. Bye.